Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session that you're joining us live and virtually from around the world. And today we're discussing what destinations consumers are booking first. Of course, none of us expected to find ourselves doing WTM virtually. And one of the things we love about WTM is the opportunity to come together, to meet, to do business, and to also take that moment of inspiration previously on the global stage. However, this is what it is, and we're all working with the situation as it is, and we're looking to get as much insight on how we can adapt our strategies and plan for the coming period. It's a very challenging period, and of course, many destinations around the world are now entering a second lockdown. So we completely understand the challenges that you're all working through. Well, in today's panel, I'm very pleased to be joined by a really esteemed set of experts and industry practitioners who are going to share their perspective on the pandemic. And of course, what is more important than anything is that when we make our strategic decisions, we're basing it on insights and data. And that is exactly the perspective we're taking in today's panel. So I'm very pleased to be joined today, and you can already see them on your screen, by Eva Stewart, Global Sector Head of Travel and Tourism at YouGov. Welcome, Eva.
Good afternoon.
I'm also very honored to be joined by Niall Gibbons, CEO of Tourism Ireland, who has a wealth of experience in this role and has been a really strong leader for the organization through some tough times. And there are some difficult periods that we are facing right now. So that experience is very welcome. And Matthias Hickel, he's the Director of Business Intelligence at the German National Tourism Board. Welcome, Matthias, and we're really keen to get into some of the research and data, which is your speciality.
A warm welcome from busy Frankfurt.
Great. So we have a really interesting set of perspectives. And of course, like every year at WTM, the one thing that doesn't change is your participation and your involvement. So we're really pleased that we have you with us in the audience. And we would like to invite you already to start thinking about the burning questions you have and that you want to put to this panel throughout the next hour. We will bring in some of your questions during the panel discussion that we have later on. And we will, of course, spend the last 15 minutes discussing and debating anything that you throw at us. So whether you want a research perspective, a leadership perspective, or a business intelligence and data perspective, feel free to send us your questions, and we will certainly try to answer as many as we can. Well, to set the context of today's panel, we're going to spend the first 10 minutes looking at some really interesting data and research from YouGov. I will leave Eva to tell you a bit more about what YouGov do and about the research that she's going to share with us. Then I'm going to try to interrogate and jump into some of that data with a lively discussion with Eva, where we'll try to really get underneath the skin of what she shares in her opening presentation. And then I'll be bringing Niall and Matthias into that conversation, where we then open it up to a panel. And we try to understand what are the implications of this from an industry and a destination perspective. So without any further ado, I would like to hand straight over to Eva, who is going to share with us what the outlook is looking like from their fantastic research. So Eva, over to you. So to speak, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Nick. So I'm going to share a presentation because I thought it's probably not so interesting for people to just look at my face for the next 10 minutes. And we can also reference some data points in there. So firstly, about YouGov, for those who haven't heard of us, we are a research and consumer survey company. We've got a very engaged, large panel, around 10 million people around the world, filling out our surveys and polls on a daily basis. And, you know, these are in around 40 odd countries around the world. We've been working with travel and tourism industry for a very long time, but more specifically sort of from a brand reputation perspective, and also from a custom research perspective. And for the first time, we have recently launched a few syndicated offers as well, because we realize how important it is for destinations to track a lot of different tourism metrics, and especially consumer sentiment about travel, their expectations. There's a lot of data volatility in the market, and therefore, ability to track this on an ongoing basis becomes really valuable, important, and hopefully we can work with as many organizations, because we're really, really committed to this sector, and we've been learning lots about what our clients need, and hopefully I'll share some of the insights from sort of hot topics, popular discussion topics during this presentation as well. So back in August, YouGov collected data from markets around the world about people's travel plans, and we examined where they've been, where they plan to go, and how they perceive the world's popular tourist destinations. Those insights were aggregated into a white paper titled Vacation Dreams, and I'd like to share some top insights from that report briefly. If you'd like a copy of it, there's a short link provided at the bottom right corner of the slide, and I will repeat it at the end again. But firstly, it would be useful to explain what we track and where. So we survey each of the 25 markets, as you can see listed on the right-hand side, with at least 100 surveys per market per day, making it over 52,000 surveys per market per year. On the left-hand side, you can see the key metrics we evaluate destinations on. These are on the same measures used by leading agencies to track the performance, campaigns, and trends for thousands of consumer brands around the world. So we really kind of looked at the destination as a brand. So we now measure brand health, engagement, and all the important fan funnel, which helps establish how travelers perceive a destination and the willingness to travel there. Now we'll take a few minutes to look back on the findings of the Vacation Dreams white paper, which we have published in September. And in the interest of time, I will cover a few sections of the report only, looking at where people were keen or, indeed able to travel in summer, how destination rankings evolved, and which destinations received the most buzz. You may know a popular saying, the only constant is change. And that certainly applied to data that we saw from the start of the summer and into the autumn. With every piece of news, good or bad, reaching consumers, travel corridors opening or being closed, we saw a constant shift in the preferred destination rankings. So these tables show figures which are percentage of the total sample asked about where they were most likely to visit when they were in the market next to plan a holiday. They were an average score over 30 days up to the end of August. And notably, preferences for next trip varied widely between markets. So in India, domestic holidays were preferred, although Switzerland made a surprising appearance in third position. But in other markets, a much greater intent to travel abroad was visible. As Europe opened for summer, Germany's top 10 was made up of international destinations. In the UK, domestic travel topped the list, and more so when popular destinations of Spain and France were added to the quarantine list. Finally, in the US, with borders to international tourism closed, Americans too opted for domestic travel, citing Florida, California, and islands of Hawaii. Although somewhat unsurprising, they felt nostalgic about traveling to Canada, Mexico, and two of the famous European destinations, Italy and France. I just want to caution that if you don't see another popular destination listed for one of the markets, that could be due to the destination not being included as one of the 50 options for respondents to choose from. So in that case, we would need to look at each destination individually, and certainly, some of those rankings would change, but here we're not really doing a top 10 most popular destinations. We're really more looking at it as a data of what's on somebody's mind and how that sort of changes. As I've mentioned, we've seen quite a bit of volatility in the market. So we also looked at the top 5 destinations in each market for intent to visit on respondents' next trip by an increase in score compared to the previous month's percentage score. So that is August versus July. And in these tables, you can see the order as they appear in the overall country ranking. Worth noting that preferences for travelers next holiday can be influenced by a range of factors, including marketing campaigns, word of mouth, really, really important, and especially around holiday season, exchange rate, ease of travel, and of course, the news, whether it's about COVID, how they're dealing well or not so well. The tables show how even a small difference in positive preference can help a destination get ahead of many of its competitors. And if we look at UK, let's take an example of Sweden. It had plenty of positive coverage about its relatively favorable COVID-19 situation. So then it has seen the biggest score increase amongst Britain. One of the metrics we monitor is buzz, which asks people whether they have heard something positive or negative about a destination in the past 2 weeks. It allows marketeers to keep track of noise around destinations that travelers have taken notice of. And here we displayed the top scoring destinations in each market for net buzz in August. Increasingly further flung destinations were receiving the highest buzz scores. In particular, Canada and New Zealand performed particularly well. The latter presumably because of its long COVID-19 free status. And between them, they take 5 of the 6 top spots, giving the destinations good long-term tourism prospects. The rankings of Australia and India feature domestic destinations, and from a destination marketeer's perspective, that means there's plenty of local bandwidth through which to communicate positive messaging without it really being caught up in global chatter. In addition to the report findings, I wanted to share with you how chatter about destinations may relate to purchase intent. So what we're seeing on the slide now is a select sample of 5 destinations illustrating the trend of how Britons have considered each for their next trip. So we see that domestic travel still tops the list, but after it peaked from mid-August, it came down to a sort of the start of September and increased again at the end of September. We can also see how other destinations such as Spain, Italy, France, and the US have peaked or tailed off, but sort of retaining a fairly steady interest amongst the future UK travelers. I've plotted a similar data for Germany, and the obvious similarity is huge people's interest in domestic tourism, whereas other destinations, although they are trailing below those levels, we can see that consistent interest to travel abroad remains, and it sort of doesn't really kind of come down, and a lot of these destinations retain a very good interest across the board. So our white paper also had a section on affluent perspective, but to make this analysis a bit more relevant to today's panel discussion themes, I wanted to share some alternative yet relevant insights. So YouGov has conducted a global affluent survey in 23 countries around the world, diving into 12 lifestyle categories with travel amongst them. And our coverage spanned all global regions with about 3,000 respondents in North America, nearly 1,000 in Latin America, 2,500 in Europe, 200 in the Middle East, and 2,700 across APAC. So with COVID-19 cases back on the rise, it is unsurprising that many amongst us are nervous about the spread of the virus, with concern levels across all regions remaining high. Most respondents believed that pandemic will not be over until 2021 or later. When it comes to affluent households, personal economic confidence was stronger than their belief in their country's or global economy, as shown in the charts. Notably, there are some exceptions. China has weathered the pandemic remarkably well, and as we know from various research, that their domestic travel demand was recently close to the pre-pandemic levels. McKinsey reported that hotel occupancy rates and numbers of domestic flight passengers bounced back to around 90% of 2019 level by the end of August. And railway travel also showed a very strong recovery. So Chinese are confident in the strength of their country's economy, their personal situation, but they do show a more measured outlook about the performance of the global economy. And although global economy is becoming vulnerable to COVID-19 again, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, where the second wave has far outweighed, some improvements in epidemiology and posing further threats to Western economies, majority of the global affluent think they can ride out a recession. An average confidence score of 73% amongst those who strongly agree they are in good shape to endure a recession, which is even more pronounced amongst Gen X and baby boomers, all responding in sort of early 80%. When it comes to attitudes about traveling, though, while a few have already done so, many are waiting until 2021 or later to fly commercially and or to take an international vacation. We can also take a look at attitudes about luxury, with many respondents exercising caution, saying that they will either wait and see before buying important luxury items or focusing on experiences rather than things, but thinking carefully before they make those purchases. I'm thinking perhaps there is an opportunity to convince those travelers that it's worth enjoying a fancy retreat in the sun, for Christmas, for New Year's, than staying in the rain and grey of their home country. That would certainly get my vote. And, now I'm thinking about a mental note to go and speak to my husband that, maybe we can try and find one of those amazing destinations. So when asked about what types of leisure trips they'd be comfortable taking, our affluent study respondents noted that their preference remains for the moment to stay locally than traveling abroad. And interestingly, differences emerged amongst generations, with Gen X being the most eager, Gen Z being the most eager to travel soon. Responses indicated they would be confident to travel and still do that in 2020. Millennials also have a higher comfort level than the average affluent when it comes to taking overnight trips, either within their region, outside their region, but within their country. And as you can see, majority of affluent respondents preferring domestic travel to international. To explore the subject in more detail and to compare affluent perspective versus that of general populations, I'd like to round off the presentation with a few additional insights from our recently launched Global Travel Profiles survey. So the data from last week gives a good degree of confidence and hope that despite the current situation and challenges, people are still eager to have holidays, still keen to travel. 52% were planning a leisure or business trip domestically, and 27% plan to travel abroad over the next 12 months. So there are clear signs emerging that consumer risk tolerance is climbing up gradually. As for generational differences, here we're really looking at, the dark greens and the dark reds. Dark greens indicate a strong and statistically significant agreement to a statement versus red, complete opposite. So for generational differences, broadly the same trends apply as seen from the affluent traveler's perspective, where Gen Z and millennials index more towards interest to travel and certainly more likely to go abroad than those of older generations. And lastly, let's take a look at whether the types of holiday that consumers want have changed considerably. Recent survey results, again, just from last week, point that visiting friends and family, going on beach holidays, and opting in for active holidays, be it in nature, winter sports, cycling, or fitness, are often the most popular choices. Having said that, there is still a large proportion of people who long for cultural trips, ability to have city getaways and experience different cultures via food and drink festivals. I wonder when we're going to have those back. And whatever the future holds, nothing can replace the eagerness of wanderlust and discovery. So on this note, I thank you for listening. And if you'd like a copy of the report, please download it from the link at the top right corner or email me and one of our team will come back to you. Also, please do stay in touch via social media where I post latest insights from our industry research. Thank you. I hear you.
Okay, hopefully that sorts out the audio issue. I was saying thank you so much for that, Eva. That really gives us some strong insight and I think a lot of food for thought. We're really keen to dig into some of that data. In particular, you give a strong sense of optimism at the end there. So thank you. I think we all needed that. And you talk a lot about the differences between different demographics and different markets, which I think will really help us to get that insight and plan. So thank you very much. And interestingly, at the very end of your presentation, you also spoke about the types of trip that people want to take. I think it's no surprise that visiting friends and family is right up the top there. But I think cities will also find some reassurance in seeing that city breaks are also very highly ranked, because of course this is one of the big concerns we all have as an industry. So thank you. Let's jump into some of that, and I'm keen to understand a little bit more some of the key metrics. So we've got 25 different markets here, but also a plethora of really interesting metrics that you shared with us. And what I'm keen to understand is which metrics are providing a really sound baseline, but which metrics are really responding to the current situation around COVID and showing us something a little bit different, particularly to the situation we find ourselves in right now.
Sure, Nick. I don't know if it's just me. It became a little bit difficult to hear you. Can
you hear me now?
Yeah, that's much better, actually. Yeah, thanks. I think I heard the question about which metrics, right, help. As I've mentioned, we look at 16 different sort of metrics, and they really can be grouped into 3 different categories. So first of all, we can look at brand health, then media metrics, which of course, help us understand how ad awareness or, recent news or word of mouth, have made sort of destinations more on, at the top of mind for people. But it's actually that lower funnel, which is the third group, which really we tend to follow on a regular basis. And we look at people's purchase intent, consideration, whether they were a current or former customer, because for different destinations, you can really see that they keep attracting sort of similar, groups or a lot of repeat travelers. And especially that really tends to be the case for, Gen X and baby boomers. They very often in surveys indicate that one of the important things that they like is actually where, places where they've been before and they really enjoyed it there. They had a great time. They still feel that, it's a quality place, that they're getting good value for money, and so they like to return to those places. So we tend to really look at a combination of different things, and most certainly, that lower funnel metrics, as I've mentioned, consideration, purchase intent, that they all feature highly. So to give you maybe, an example of, how we tracked Spain, for example, in the UK, when the borders closed, we suddenly saw the word of mouth exposure really tailing off, and people no longer kind of considered going there so much. But as soon as the travel corridor to the Canary Islands was announced, and added to the safe list, we suddenly saw, the buzz increase, the consideration increase. Then you can start sort of looking at, different demographics, who want to go, who don't want to go. It feels that people who have maybe older children, they seem to be they seem to have more confidence going than those with smaller children, because I think there's a consideration that if in case you need to quarantine on return, it might be very difficult to work at home, and so we're seeing sort of less interest amongst those consumers, versus other demographic groups. So it's just like one of those examples that we tend to track and consider.
So sometimes very, very practical or very specific barriers, and also where you see opportunities similarly as well. So tell us a little bit, and we actually have a question here, which perhaps you can touch on if you have the data to share into that. Somebody's asked a question about, have you identified any key trends related to South America? And if so, which destinations have emerged? I mean, the question I would put to you really is, which source markets are showing the most optimism in your data, and which destinations are ranking highest when we think about where people might travel next? What are the factors that are driving confidence? I saw, for example, New Zealand scoring so highly there, and I think we can all recognize that New Zealand have responded very, very strongly to the measures that they've had to put in place.
Yeah, so I think a few questions there for me. So forgive me if I forget one, but to start off with New Zealand, indeed, I think they've done such a phenomenal work, both on communication terms, but also how they've managed the COVID situation. And when we look at data streaming in from Australia, they're very, very keen to have that travel bubble with New Zealand. New Zealand as a country for the UK, for example, has always been one of the most favorite countries in the world. We recently actually ran rankings survey, which is freely available on our website, so anyone can look up any country they like and see sort of how they rank in terms of popularity, more so, less so. So New Zealand and Canada, and amongst other sort of Commonwealth countries, tend to be quite interesting and appealing to a lot of people for a number of reasons. One is one of the things cited is that the beautiful sort of clean destinations with beautiful nature, quality for money, and friendly people. So that I think New Zealanders probably carry a lot of that good image, just like the Irish, I have to say, because we spoke with Neil before, and he mentioned that they've done some studies, and Ireland's popularity in the UK is very, very strong, which absolutely does not surprise me at all. To answer the question about which countries give the most optimism in terms of wanting to travel somewhere, so it depends whether you're looking at domestic versus international perspective. Australians, which I've mentioned before, very, very strong interest to travel domestically, not so much internationally at all. In fact, they sort of remain on one side of the spectrum, of countries wanting to travel the least. Then we look at European markets like France, Germany, and the UK. indicating very strong interest. So data which came through last week for the last 30 days of when we asked people's intent to travel over the next 12 months. So the question read, which of any, trips, business, leisure, domestic, international, were they planning to take in the next 12 months? We saw that France, Germany, and UK were very keen to travel internationally, as well as actually domestically. So it's really nice to see that, that longiness for, trips abroad is definitely coming back despite, the sort of situation. In the US, they're very keen to travel domestically. There's definitely a segment there, younger generations, very keen to travel abroad. When we ask them unprompted questions about destinations, so that is, where would you like to go? And we just give them free text. They tend to actually, top 5 list would be broken out into domestic as well as far-flung destinations such as Bali, for example. Bali is very popular and sort of features a lot in all unprompted questions. And also, if we look at China, very, very keen to travel domestically. They have that confidence, as I alluded to before. They were some of the strongest, so in terms of responses, they were some of the strongest trend for upcoming domestic business trips. India and China, very keen on domestic trips. I think they want to kind of restart, that part of the economy, that part of travel again. And
Great.
in terms of Latin American countries, sorry, I think that was the last question. At the moment, we don't cover that from a syndicated perspective, but we hope to do so in future.
So it's on the wish list to answer the question of the person who sent that. Thank you very much. So clearly, really big differences between different destinations globally, but also even within a region such as Europe. So let's jump straight into the panel discussion now. And I think we've already seen some really interesting data, looking at the difference between the interest from German travelers, for example, between domestic and international. Very, very interesting insights there. I'm keen to start out by understanding how has the virus and the pandemic impacted your respective destinations, and what's your response to that? So I'll go straight away to Niall Gibbons. Welcome, and tell us a little bit how things look from the island of Ireland perspective.
Okay, thanks, Nick, and it's great to be here. Look forward to real World Travel Market next year. Great fond memories of World Travel Market, so look forward to getting back again. There's no words to describe the decimation and devastation, that COVID-19 has wreaked on all of us, and it's impacted on Ireland as well as all our partners around the globe. Like Eva, we've conducted an enormous amount of research over the last number of months, and there are a lot of consistencies with what we've done. We've conducted tens of thousands of interviews in our top source markets, and the key messages that are there, from a hope perspective, is that the intent to travel is still there for 2021. People are longing to get back on the road again. However, the capacity to self-repatriate and get home is driving a bigger amount of driving towards staying closer to home. So if we were here this time last year in WTM, we would have been talking about braggable destinations and where's the next big place on your bucket list. People want to get back to visit their friends and family. And the two words that stand out from our research are wholesome reconnection. And that's what people are looking to get back to destinations that are closer to home. So our research shows that in Great Britain, for example, Ireland is the #1 destination that people intend to travel to. It's sort of abroad, but it's sort of like home too, and a lot of friends and family connections. So no surprises there. But what we are seeing as well is that there's an enormous state of flux in relation to people's views on what's happening. And if we came back here in a month's time and had this panel conversation again, we'd probably be telling a different story. So for example, when we carried out our first wave of research in the marketplace in April and May, the European markets are showing the most interest in getting back on the road for summer holidays. Whereas now our latest research in September, October is indicating that the US are the people showing the most amount of buzz and interest in getting back on the road again, because the disease and infection rates across Europe have gone pear-shaped in the last while. So we've seen, for example, the introduction of a new traffic light system now by the European Commission, which sets a framework for restoring international connectivity. which is absolutely vital for our business. But infection rates at the moment need to fall by about 80% to get us back into sort of green zone language and conversation. So there's a huge amount going on. It's been very difficult for us. But three big things from our perspective, from an Irish perspective, and travel is so important to us, is number one, we have to base what we do on the insights of our customers. That's number one. Secondly, air connectivity is vital, particularly for Ireland, where 90% of people come by air. But for us, air connectivity is essential. If it's not there, we're not going to succeed. And thirdly, we have to support our industry, which across the globe is largely made up of small and medium-sized enterprises, many of them mom-and-pop enterprises that deliver on the experience of the promise that we make in Tourism Ireland in the marketplace. And they all have had cash burn for 8 months, and they're really hurting, and they need our support getting back out in the marketplace as soon as it's safe to do so, and hopefully in 2021. And ultimately, we need to see a vaccine, because I mean that's the only way that we can really get back to having proper structured conversations. And until then, I'm afraid we'll be in a real state of flux as we head into the early part of 21. I think for certain next year, long-haul travel is in great difficulty. Great destinations like Australia, New Zealand has done a terrific job on managing the virus and getting infection rates down, but won't be opening their borders, and neither will China. And I think Europe has to get into a similar situation to reduce infection rates and get that traffic light system working too. But then the economics are really important here too, because there's two stories here. One is that we've seen huge increases in household savings that'll be looking for a home, hopefully the holiday market. But at the same time, governments have borrowed huge amounts of money that'll need to get repaid at some point, which will impact on the economy. And then there's the other factor, which was the biggest factor for tourism for Ireland back 11 months ago, which was the decision by the UK to leave the European Union, which is happening on the 1st of January. It's been overshadowed by COVID, but that comes back into play, and that will have a big impact on our biggest neighbour.
I think, Niall, your opening remarks there stand as a reminder that actually there are other challenges, not only COVID, that we have to work with. And, it's a very, very challenging period as an industry to work through this. But I think you ought to touch on some really key points. That state flux is not something that's going away, and we're going to have to get used to working very dynamically around the reality of the current situation. And also that idea of wholesome reconnections. I've never heard someone describe it like that, but I think it's a really, really key way of thinking about the difference and the change in the market, and that move away from the long haul bucket list traveler to focusing on those really, really core markets, which will show the most resilience and the strongest bounce back in the short term. Thank you. We'll come back and we'll jump into what that means in terms of messaging and the brand and things like that. But first of all, I want to go over to Matthias. Your thing is research and data and insights. So share with us perhaps a slightly different perspective from the German National Tourist Board and how you kind of see the pandemic and how you're working through the different issues that you face as a destination.
Absolutely. So we have it a bit easier than Niall, I have to say, because you can travel to Germany by not only by airplane, by plane, but you can come in by car, you can come in by bus, by train. So the modal split is something that works for us actually. But at the end of the day, we have gone through really critical times. The overnight stays have declined drastically up to 90%. And then we were thinking, what can we do? How can we get out of that? And our strategy was to focus on nature and outdoor-oriented holidays. And this, for us, of course, is only possible because we have so many neighboring states that can come in, by their car individually, that can actually even decide without having a long booking situation beforehand. And that worked quite well. So we have seen that flights, the analytics have improved. We almost have seen up to 40% from our key countries, source markets, are recovering versus last year during July, August. So this was pretty well. Overnight stays have worked very well. But also we face that from a overseas perspective, the business is extremely low and has not changed since that. So this is, if you take the overnights, it's minus 97% for China and Japan. A little bit better for the United States, but not so much better actually. And this situation we face, along with the situation where Germany as the #1 market in terms of fairs, international fairs, is pretty much dependent on the business customers, and this segment has not worked so well during the last couple of months either.
Thank you, Matthias. I'm going to come back to Eva with some of those questions about the different segments, because I think you showed some really interesting insights, perhaps a little bit surprising when we think about the different demographics and also, the upscale traveler. But first of all, I think we've got a really relevant question that's come in here. So do keep sending your questions and I will field them to our great panel. So somebody's asked, does Niall think that travelers from the UK and Europe will be more open to traveling by car or in a bubble to Ireland? And do you have any data that's showing this? Of course, you mentioned the huge importance of connectivity by air that Ireland is dependent on, but have you seen an uptick or a change when it comes to travel by car?
Well, we've certainly seen in our surveys that traveling by car is seen as a safer mode than traveling by air. No question about that. However, quarantine is the biggest barrier to restoration of travel at the moment, and there is a 14-day quarantine restriction up until last week in relation to coming into Ireland. If you're coming from a green zone now, there is no quarantine, but sadly there are no green zones across Europe. So in relation to the UK, I remain very optimistic about the long-term future for UK travel into Ireland. It's our biggest market by volume. We take about an 8% share or 9% share of the UK outbound travel market. It's a very convenient destination. There are, over 235 seats on sale every single week from Britain into Ireland from across about 15 different airports. So very, very easy to get to, and the ferry service is very strong. However, I think until people are reassured that they're going to be able to travel safely, not get the infection and not get stuck, we're still going to be stuck really in a difficult, uncertain climate. But I think as soon as there are signs of a vaccine and post-COVID travel, I think you'll see a very robust performance from Great Britain coming into Ireland, not just with the air travel, but also on the ferry side as well, and cars, yeah.
Yeah, and you actually speak to some very practical things. The traffic light system that the European Commission has put in place being hugely valuable just to help communicate and inform travelers about what is safe and where they can go. Of course, getting that under control so that there are some green lights is obviously really key. But I'm keen to sort of jump in and understand a little bit about how the pandemic has shaped your brand messaging. And, we're so used to putting really inspirational images and storytelling about the destination globally. This is our expertise. This is what we do. Niall, behind you, you've got your Painting the World Green photos, which really show us, just an example of that. But have you had to shift and adapt your messaging during this period? We see, a need perhaps for very functional marketing, which actually is very informative rather than a traditional inspirational approach.
Yeah, we changed very quickly. Our messaging was very clear from the start. We suspended our traditional paid marketing activity back in March when it was clear that this was going in a difficult direction. However, what we did do is get all our key stakeholders on board. And I think everyone agreed, including our tourism ministers, the North and South, that it was important to keep the lights on abroad. So really, we started to take all the strengths abroad, our international office network, our Department of Foreign Affairs, our great global website of Ireland.com, and it became really a stage for everything that's great about Ireland, particularly arts and culture as well. So we started to broadcast events and really turned it into a showcase for Ireland with that Dream Now, Travel Later message. So it kept the brand alive. The numbers have been very good. We've had over 200 million views on Facebook Live alone, some terrific interaction with some concerts we put on. And the way I describe it to our stakeholders here at home is that we've got this global stage, all the talents at home, so let's marry the two together. And I think what it's made us do, it's made us really good collaborators because, I think it's brought arts and culture to the forefront of tourism, and that's what it is that differentiates us. We sometimes get lost in marketing messaging without thinking about actually what's at the DNA of what we're offering here. It's differentiation. And when the time comes, we'll be here ready with open arms to welcome you. And, it's about that, not just the visibility, but the audibility of Ireland as well. And we have a big responsibility in that space. And we've been thrilled with our reaction around the globe. And we're preparing now for a major new relaunch for St. Patrick's Day in 2021, when hopefully we'll see planes back in the sky and people traveling again.
Great. So you've really been able to kind of export that Irish culture and allow people to engage with the brand, perhaps in a richer or a more meaningful way. And of course, we all know that the brand life the brand funnel is a very long process. So that top of funnel work will pay off once people can travel again. Matthias, you're in your research role at the GNTB. Tell us a bit about how this kind of day-to-day working since March has evolved, and how you've kind of, as an organization, brought research, data, and insights really into the fore in order to be able to process this as part of your day-to-day response to what is an ever-changing situation.
Yes, so actually I had to reinvent market research, because when you do classical market research and you can do this, let's say, every second week or so and have longer frequencies and cycles, then chances are that the data that you survey is already not up to date the moment you receive it. So I have to really think about what can we do, what can we use as other data sources, and this is also my journey in order to support the campaign team who eventually have to translate it into their campaign decisions. So let me give you an example. So every Monday morning, or let's say sometimes every Sunday, I'm sitting in front of my computer and analyze the flight situations, the flight statistics, which I can report then Monday morning to our management and to our campaign marketing team. And that is what I have in mind to expand for other ways how we can travel into Germany. And I think this is very important, that we change the way we look at the things, we change the methods, we increase frequencies throughout the pandemic, and that we are able to give the right answers. And this actually is something that keeps me and the team quite busy these days.
I think we all recognize the importance of research like never before now. So there's a huge appreciation for that department in every organization, and indeed the work that you're doing there. So we can clearly see a shift of marketing strategy from annually to monthly to weekly, now to daily to real time. And this is just something we have to work with. So Eva, I want to go back to you, and I'm just going to leave a question with the panel because it's a very, very open question. So we might end with a closure on that, which is, how long do you expect leisure travel to be impacted by COVID-19? I don't know if any of you have a crystal ball, but that's a question that someone's put forward, and I guess it's something that we all would love to know. So before we go back to that, Eva, you talked a lot about demographics and segments, and you showed some interesting differences. I'd love to touch a bit more on the patterns that you've seen, particularly with the upscale traveler, and barriers and opportunities there, and also then issues that are very important to people, like sustainability, and where they come into play in this kind of new normal that we're working through.
Okay. So in order to start with generational differences, and in a way this ties into the question from the audience about leisure trips, I would say that a really important thing to consider now is the fact that it's the younger generations who want to travel first. And it's really, really important to think about how to market to them, because Gen Z are extremely social media savvy. You know, they use social media differently on different platforms. They showcase sort of themselves through photos on Instagram. They scroll through quick news on Twitter. You know, they share real life moments on Snapchat, and then acquire information on Facebook. And they actually are the ones that also want to participate and contribute to your content creation. So I think from a destinations perspective, it would be interesting to consider how to engage, those young people, and that way actually attract them to your country. When we look at generational differences and particular choices of holiday destination selection influence, perhaps unsurprisingly so, but they indicate that they're looking for low-cost carriers, cheap flights, cheap hotels, activities. They're looking for availability of, that transport like trains. They also like to go to destinations where they have friends. And what's really important to them is actually having that recommendation by somebody, by a family member, by a friend. if we compare that to baby boomers, for example, what drives them to select particular destination is overall value for money. It's the temperature, of that particular destination. It's outstanding natural beauty, and the fact that they've already been there before and they really liked it. Maybe that sort of associates to special memories. So it's very different audience, interest, etc. To your previous question about, transportation modes. Again, Gen Z and millennials, if they really look for them, from their perspective, safe travel is now by train, but they don't mind actually using public transportation. That has, become apparent from some of our other surveys on transportation. But they also look forward to being able to use the likes of Uber, when they get to a destination. And those of older destinations are definitely more keen to travel in their own vehicle. And last question about sustainable travel. Again, this very strongly relates to generational differences, because so many of respondents in Gen Z and in millennials groups are saying that they consider themselves to be responsible travelers. So somebody who's wellness focused, who considers environmental impact, who is culturally minded, and but equally they consider themselves as an adventurous traveler. So their main priority in traveling is to explore the destination, the engage in some outdoor activities. So knowing all these things can really help advance some of the marketing strategies, I feel. So yeah, it would be interesting to hear what the panel thinks on that as well.
Yeah, anybody want to reflect or react to that?
I think Eva makes a lot of valid points that we're seeing in our research as well. Young people are going to take more risks right now. I mean, there's an older demographic that would have been very valuable to our country that'll probably suffer in the short to medium term. It will come back. Value for money will be very important for some groups. Luxury will be more resilient. But I think the questions here are so fundamental and so enormous that when we come back, if we came back in a month's time, we might have a different set of answers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Matthias spoke about, about a change in messaging towards more outdoor nature and things like this. And Niall, I know that Tourism Ireland have invested a lot over the last 10 years in product development and reinforcing the image and awareness and messaging around it. The Wild Atlantic Way is very famous, a huge success. And most recently, you've focused on Ireland's Ancient East, which is this current big project. How important does this product development work in these different areas? How important is it now when we consider also the changing preferences of travelers to get out and to feel in a kind of safe environment and discover somewhere new or less well-traveled?
I think it was fundamentally important this year. It was ultimately when it was put to the test, because the domestic market, which we relied on this summer, was very much looking for the outdoors, didn't want crowded spaces, no festivals or events. So for places like the Wild Atlantic Way, anywhere that's non-urban was always going to be good. And there are a lot of activity providers as well that have established businesses over the last sort of 4 or 5 years that were saved by the summer season. So I think it really has given people a taste here of a range of things to see and do that they mightn't have tried before, and that's a good thing as well. But ultimately, you can't keep packing big crowds in, so I think sustainability will be very, very important, because Ireland trades itself on having a good green environment, which we do, and that's very important for us. But I think it's made, not just in Ireland, but our research is sort of showing that people have actually enjoyed their holidays at home this year, particularly in our mainland European markets, where people would generally take their foreign holiday. We saw a significant percentage say, actually, I enjoyed it more than I thought. And it will be interesting to see in the long term, too early to say now, whether people might turn the dial and say, maybe I'll stay at home next year as well. Obviously, we hope they'll travel. But I think the long-term trends remain to be evaluated.
Yeah, well, we can see this also. Well, we have figured out that there's a new norm in travel. So just as people get used to the pandemic situation in their daily life, they also get used to it during their travel. And there is much less how can I say, it's much less negative sentiment around it. And the impact of COVID on central questions for travel, like destination, kind of transportation, accommodation, this impact is getting less, much less than we've researched in May this year.
Great. I think you really share something that is on the top of our mind for a lot of us is, will this change our strategies long term? Are we going to revisit that domestic market and try to rebuild and reinvigorate domestic tourism? It's a huge opportunity for what many destinations have found to be a declining market, but now they see a real opportunity because people have learned to love what they have on their doorstep, which is a great thing. It's also great for the brand, if nothing else, because having locals that appreciate and are great ambassadors is really, really key. But speaking of locals, somebody's asked a question about what the impact has been in terms of local communities. We talk a lot about travelers, but what about local communities? And do we see a kind of fear of travelers or a resistance from travelers when we think about opening markets up again? And of course, the risk of the virus spreading.
Yeah, that's something that we are very conscious of. And I think the more rural the community, the more nervous people are because the age profile tends to be older and they're more vulnerable. And when we looked at our island communities, people living on islands off the island of Ireland, they're even more remote and even more nervous. So I think safety protocols become really, really important. But I think it just shows you, we're living through extraordinary times. People were very nervous and very scared back in March and April. I think we've learned to handle things better now, and that's why you're seeing a much lower mortality rate in relation to the virus. But I think people will still be cautious, and it's that whole lesson, we need to protect the people who are vulnerable here. It's not all about tourism. It's about sustainable communities, and that's been able to get the balance right between everything. So I think we've learned a lot and come a long way, but still a bit to go.
Great. And we have a few more questions, which I don't think we're going to have time to jump into. People are asking about accommodation and whether we've seen differences there. Does anyone want to give a quick thought on that?
Yes, self-catering, caravan camping, outdoorsy type things, maybe Airbnb, hotels more nervous.
And somebody else has asked, when will the borders open for EU countries to Ireland, for non-EU countries to Ireland and Germany? I guess we would all love to know that, right? Probably the answer is when everybody sorts COVID out. But does anyone have any thoughts on when we might start to see long-haul travel pick up again?
I think we're going to be looking at 2022.
Okay, it's important to
I'd be a little bit more optimistic, but it really does depend on which countries sort of open up first. But when we ask unprompted questions, that especially in Germany, in the last few months, more like August, September, we really saw interest to go to New York, to San Francisco, and as I mentioned, in America, we're seeing some long haul interest as well. In UK, we saw similar trends with slightly different destinations. So I'd really like to hope that, if destination is perceived safe and is added to the safe list and, the border opens up, that, we'll be able to go again. I'd hope so.
Yeah, we all hope so. Well, I guess, Matthias, I know that Germany and Singapore recently signed an agreement to create an air bridge between the two countries. I guess to answer that person's question, this is probably going to be a very gradual and bilateral process of opening up those long-haul destinations. So we just all have to really work at it. And I guess, what Niall was saying about local communities is we also have a strong sense of responsibility that we have as an industry, that when we do open up, that we open up very, very safely and responsibly, because it's about protecting our destinations, our populations, the safety of everybody. And ultimately, it's about assuring that we can rebuild and recover without further volatility. I'm going to leave us with one final question, which is for each of you to just summarize, what do you think will be the lasting impact of COVID and the pandemic on our industry? What is the big change that is going to be with us, for the next generation of travel?
Gosh, you finished off with a hard question. It's very hard to tell. I think this has fundamentally shattered the industry to its foundations, and I think that makes people maybe more vulnerable into the future. But look, the fundamental desire to travel is there. That's shown in the research. And this is an industry that's built on its people, on culture, and I think we have to mind it and mind each other. And when we do that, we'll see the fundamentals come good. People will travel again, and the destinations that look after their customers, that continue to invest through the cycle. By the way, I came into tourism just after 9/11. There were some destinations that never regained their North American business. Ireland and Italy came back relatively quickly, but we continue to invest through the cycle to remind people that we are here. Our arms are open when you're ready to travel again. It is a safe destination. It'll be easy to get to. But there are fundamentals on the economics here that we just don't know how long it will take. I mean, governments have borrowed huge amounts of money. Airlines have been bailed out to the tune of billions and billions of euros, and that will require some demand to support those enterprises get back on their feet.
Niall, I'm going to have to say thank you to everybody. That was a great closing remark. I think we can all agree with that. And, we just cannot say what all of the effects of this will be, and the societal, traveler behavior and economic impacts that we all have to see and monitor what the lasting impacts of that will be. I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of you once again. Eva, Niall and Matthias, it's been really great having you and your thoughts on all the issues we face today. There's so much to discuss. We simply don't have time to discuss it all. And thank you for the audience for watching and for all of your questions. I hope this has provided some insight that will help you prepare and work with your strategies a little bit more effectively in these challenging times. Thank you very much for joining, and I'll hand back to the World Travel Market team virtual.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.